Greetings, children. Welcome back. So, today we're going to talk about angles. Now, really common mistake people have when they're writing angles is they misspell the word angles and they end up talking about angels. So, that's a different class completely. So, make sure you spell it A-N-G-L-E-S instead of E-L-S so that you're in the right subject. So, we've introduced angles in the very first section when we started talking about geometry, but let's go over that real quick. We said an angle is made up of two rays that share the same endpoint. We call that endpoint the vertex. So here's our vertex. Each part of the angle, each ray, is called a side. So an angle has two sides. And then we can measure the angle. And you measure angles with a protractor or other tool. So we measure the angle to see how many degrees it contains. There's actually other measurement systems as well. There's one called radians that you use in upper math, and one called gradients that you use in engineering. So we have the vertex, the point where the two meet. We have the sides of the angle. Those are the rays that meet at the vertex. So degrees are what we generally use to measure an angle. There are more precise ways to measure angles. Degrees can be broken into minutes and seconds. So just like on a clock, and hours in minutes and seconds, angles can be broken into degrees, minutes, and seconds as well. So there's several different ways to classify angles. So we're going to look at several of those. And the way we're going to look at first is classifying angles by their size. So as far as we're concerned in this book, the angles that we're going to be dealing with are going to be less than 360 degrees. 360 would make a full circle. Okay, so we have an angle that is between 0, so greater than 0, but less than 90 degrees is an acute angle. It's a cute little angle here. Okay, if we have one that's exactly 90 degrees, we talked about that when we talked about perpendicular. So it'd be two perpendicular rays. This is called a right angle. If it's greater than 90 but less than 180, then it's an obtuse angle. So that's this angle here, this little one here. If it's exactly 180 degrees, we call it a straight angle. So that's a straight angle. And then when we're talking about an angle that is more than 180 degrees, here's how they draw the example in your book. This outside angle, that's called a reflex angle. So a reflex angle. So there's 5 different ways to classify these according to their size. An acute angle is more than 0 but less than 90. A right angle is exactly 90. Obtuse is between 90 and 180. Exactly 180 is straight. And if it's more than 180 but less than 360, then it's a reflex angle. Now, we also discussed naming angles in our first lesson, but let's give that a quick review as well. So, when you have an angle, there's 3 different ways to name it. So let's say that we have, let's say, G, C, A. So we could call this angle C because that's the vertex. So we can name it with the vertex as long as there's not other angles that are also at the same vertex. We can name it angle ACG, or you can name it GCA. So there's the 3 different ways to name an angle. Remember, you have to start at one of the sides, go to the vertex, and then the other side. Notice the vertex is always in the middle. We can't name it CAG. That's not the angle that we drew on the board here. Okay, and then the other concepts that we're going to talk about are when we have multiple angles that share a vertex. So there's several different ways for angles to share a vertex. If we have two intersecting lines, so two lines that intersect, they form four angles. Here's 1, 2, 3, and 4 different angles here. The ones that are in opposite parts, so 1 and 3 or 2 and 4, are called vertical angles. The only thing they share is this vertex. So they just share a vertex, so we call them vertical angles. Now, there's actually more angles that are formed, and let's look at this example. These two angles add up to a bigger angle. The bigger angle that they add up to is 180 degrees because this is one straight line. So if you have two angles that add up to 180 degrees, we call those supplementary angles. Angles with a sum of 180. We also have two angles with a sum of 90. So if we have a right angle here, and then we have this angle and this other angle, these two smaller angles add up to 90. So that means that they are complementary angles. Notice how complementary is spelled. It's C-O-M-P-L-E-M-E-N-T-A-R-Y. It's not spelled like complementary, like, oh, you have such lovely shoes. It's not spelled in the same way. Okay? Complementary and supplementary, the ones I drew on the board, are also examples of adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are angles that are right beside each other. That's what the word adjacent means. And they share a common ray. So that makes them adjacent angles. And then one other concept is congruent angles. And just like we talked about yesterday with congruent line segments, congruent angles are when two angles have the same measure. So let's say we drew some angles on the board here, and I had an angle over here, and this one is BAD, and then an angle over here, and this one is RES. Okay, so we could say, since I drew these and they're both 30 degrees, don't measure them because they're not, but let's assume that they both are, we could say angle BAD is congruent to angle RES. So if they have the same measure, then they're congruent. We could also just name this one angle A and say it's congruent to angle E. So congruent, same symbol we use for segments. It's an equal sign with bacon on top. So we got the equal sign, bacon. Okay? So I hope that helps you in your study of geometry, in your pursuit of knowledge, learning about angles. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks. Have a great day.